All right, well, we'll jump into this one, and hopefully we can get some good questions as well. But yeah, it was interesting to see the outcome of the earnings call from just overall market reaction to and Reddit and X. Some of the reactions, positive, neutral, negative, kind of ran the whole gamut. Curious what your first initial takes were as you listened to Rob and Paul and Joe Ben on the call.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was great to have all of them. Rob gives that blade perspective. You got Paul kind of covering the defense sector, and then Joe Ben popping in and out. And then I thought also Rodrigo is now starting to really be a really key component of the team, and he talked about the discipline in which they want to allocate the capital. They talked about the half year projection being more accurate and straightforward. And so I thought overall that was nice to see the interplay. It wasn't just all Joe Ben. There were some highlights. I think probably the main topic is the comments about the plane, how many passengers, at what point do you think you get to, four, etc. So that's going to generate a lot of interest. And then, man, they had so many accomplishments in terms of that Bonnie Doon trip. They had Oliver had released the new plane, showed the picture, the teaser shot of that, and said that the propellers were spinning. So I don't know. It felt like in previous quarters this would be the biggest thing to talk about, but in this last quarter or in the last 3 months, I mean, there's so much news, so many things happening. Vertiports, the EIPP. I mean, like, I think there were almost like too many things to talk about. So I don't know what your perspective is. If and they purposely didn't talk about Toyota that much in the shareholder letter. There was just a couple mentions, but they had covered Toyota for the last 2 months. If you've been following, they've mentioned Toyota a lot. So nothing that I was concerned about, but it just showed me that the space is compressing, and so the story is being told one layer, one chapter at a time, and this was another chapter. But it felt like a really busy quarter, and we certainly had a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah, no, all great comments, and I think we're probably pretty aligned as we stay pretty close on all things Joby throughout the week, both visibly on X, but also in the behind the scenes, as we were kind of laughing about before, all the different rabbit holes and things that we take ourselves down to try and stay honest and focused on both not just the positive, but the challenging aspects of what Joby and everybody, for that matter, in AAM is trying to pull off. So, yeah, I think for me, we can kind of just jump into quickly scanning through the shareholder letter for things that jumped out, and then hopefully get some questions and lean into some of the conversation on Reddit. And I think that's really important. And also something that was a great highlight was Joby still using Reddit as a platform to reach out to retail investors. And although it was just one question from Q&A that came in through Reddit, I think that's just a great sign to see that they are paying attention to what people are saying about the company, and also, from the retail side, has been part of the loudest chorus for all the time when Joby didn't have as much maybe public facing information or articles or things out there, or the team was just still being keeping things close to the vest. So
Yeah.
without further ado, I will share here. Perfect. That should.
We've got several different time zones dialing in today. We've got Union, Ohio, we've got Atlanta, and then we've got San Diego.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I
No
don't
one
know
from Kazakhstan yet, but I'm hopeful.
why. Well, this is saying that it's sharing, but I can see that it isn't. So let me try and refresh this here.
And then we've also got someone who drove by the Dayton facility. Uh, and is ready to camp out and watch the parking lot. So another Let's Talk Joby believer.
Well, good deal. Let me restart this real quick. I don't know why I didn't want to share screen. I'll be right back.
Hey, I'll just hang out here with you while we're waiting for Travis to get back up and boot in again. Here we go. Hey, Travis. I wonder in chat, MP told if you had any observations from the parking lot. It looks like you were there, camped out, kind of checking out the action. I know I've talked to different people who have done something similar and kind of seen the evolution of the Joby sign going up, and then the workers coming in, and then eventually the pickup trucks and people kind of rolling in to do a shift. And I'm curious if that operation is going kind of like Marina, where it seems like it's a 24-hour operation with like a 2-hour gap each week. I doubt that that's happening, but I know from some of the job postings, if you take a look at what's happening, they're posting for roles that start at 6, and go to 4:30, multiple shifts, things like that, and you can start to piece together what's happening. But it seems like it's basically manufacturing scaling that's starting to come alive, and we're seeing the little pieces. Looking at some of the Joby open recs, you can see that the way that they're structuring their shifts are, 4 days with longer chunks of time, so longer shifts, and then they bring in the second shift, and they bring in the third shift, and looking at all of the hours, there's basically a 2-hour gap on a Sunday where someone isn't working. Hey, we were just kind of talking, riffing about the Joby, Ohio operation in Dayton, and a comment from chat that someone was going to hang out and check out the parking lot. And I just talked a little bit about how Joby's shift schedules are kind of evolving to almost a round the clock type operation with that 2-hour gap on Sunday. Oh, you're on mute.
Hopefully not on mute any longer.
Perfect. You're back. We got the letter up.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, I don't know what the heck was going on with the internet there. Of course, as life goes, you have to be dynamic and flexible. But yeah, so glad to hear that we got some questions from folks, and you've done a lot of the research on Dayton, and also obviously from the career side of things. And we've learned a lot. I think a lot of which hasn't really been publicly talked about, although people could find it if they just looked hard enough, of some of the more quiet advancements that Joby has made from the team side of things and hiring, and also insights into what they're hiring for, which I think is pretty beneficial. So really excited to see that there's some more interest about that. So from there, we'll jump into the shareholder letter and kind of run through just these first couple points. Stop me if there's anything that you want to highlight explicitly. But the increase in the certification progress for the 4th stage, I think seems like a small nuance, but actually a large one, was that this was the FAA portion. Obviously, for each of the stages, Joby has highlighted both the Joby portion, but the FAA portion. And to have the FAA portion increase by 18%, 18 points, was actually 33% increase from last quarter. So that was pretty impactful from my perspective, looking at that progress over time and consistency. And then, of course, we saw 547 Juliet X-ray, the first FAA conforming eVTOL aircraft for TIA flights. We got a little bit more, let's just say, commentary. I don't know if it was anything explicit yet, because obviously this is going to be held very close to the vest from Joby. And now, as we've seen from the plans that were also announced yesterday from Uber, that the first passengers are still expected in 2026. So that's been guidance that has continued since the kind of back half of last year. Hopefully that stays on track. Obviously, it is just guidance. There's other factors at play outside of just with things within Joby's control. But exciting to see, Uber putting their name on this as well. Obviously, the Crown Prince of Dubai has talked about this explicitly. The RTA and GCAA in Dubai and UAE have put out a lot about this, especially after the Dubai Air Show. So again, I think that's a positive sign. We'll see how that continues to unfold over the next 9 to 10 months of the year. Then production, the S4T gas turbine electric demonstrator for the Department of War. Obviously, we knew about those things, and then kind of just some more perspective from the financials, which we stay away from, at least publicly, to kind of give commentary on. But exciting to see here that as others in the space have really leaned on having cash, et cetera, as being such a key factor. Joby now, if you can do some simple math from what they ended Q4 2025 with and what they're offering, the outcome of the offering that they had just earlier in February was, we'll see that Joby's, in the 2 billion plus in terms of cash and equivalents. And that's pretty exciting from the guidance that they gave on some of the spend that will happen as they start to scale production and move away from just testing. So anything of these highlights that you wanted to emphasize the most on, or that you thought were the most impactful for the story for the quarter?
I would just compare what you said. I think if you look at this whole list, compared to other quarters, they might highlight different things like the partnership progress. They might highlight Toyota. They might highlight some of the other things they were doing. And as you listen to the call, it seemed like the shift is to really basically scaling manufacturing, making sure they have enough planes for this opportunity with the EIPP. I think they talked about the getting the conforming plane getting going. Some of that was done outside of the call with Oliver from the marketing standpoint, talking about the propellers are spinning on the conforming plane. And maybe they didn't get into a lot of those details. So between what they've shared prior, what they shared here, it seemed a very focused conversation around scaling manufacturing, taking advantage of all the opportunity and demand they see. And then, obviously it was a financial call. So the capital that you need and how to manage it, how to be good stewards of all of the investment in the company. And then, the whole story is what they talked about, plus everything before the Bonnie Doon trip. It's a financial and emotional and innovation and a founder story. So, not everything came through, I think, in just the earnings call. And that's why I think it's important to kind of have these conversations and sometimes divorce the numbers from the company, because sometimes the numbers don't really tell you everything.
Yeah, and as always, appreciate your depth and perspective of looking at the larger story. And made a post earlier today with just kind of overall thoughts, but I finished it with, don't miss the forest for the trees. And I think as you just highlighted, there was almost so much that happened at the tail end of the year and into the beginning of this year that it all got lumped together. And then also forgotten. And I think also some of the expectation in some of that waiting period or silence has also bred a lot of anxiety from people that, some of it justified and other parts of it maybe I think a little bit differently of. But so as we just kind of, run through the letter for anybody who's, hasn't seen it yet, obviously go to Joby's IR site. But, a lot of key things about Dubai, about the Uber partnership, about production, and then also just some of the demand and highlighting, obviously some of the key things that have happened over, throughout 2025 and then into 2026. So everybody should definitely go back and look through all those things. There's quite a bit, as well as the financial summary. But what I want to most importantly scroll up to and kind of talk about progress, because I think it's one of the most important things that somehow just became a small bullet point. But it's, again, Joby has heavy is the head that wears the crown, and Joby is at the top of the heap. So obviously a lot of pressure and focus on them. But it's been really exciting for those of us who've been following along Joby for years and years and years. And shout out to the Joby subreddit, because there's been a lot of great research that's come out of there and some other people via X, where we had seen and heard about 547 Juliet X-ray from when it first got registered into the FAA registry with the N number, the tail end of last year. And then, there was a bit of silence. Then we saw a couple blips on the ADS-B and FlightAware of seeing that they were doing some testing with it. And then, here, as highlighted in the shareholder letter, and then further emphasized, which was really important, from Oliver Walker-Jones of Joby, that this picture that we see of 547 Juliet X-ray wasn't it just sitting on the tarmac like, can be found for other, photos that you'll find of people testing out eVTOL. But this picture is actually showing the aircraft spinning on the ground, so doing some ground testing, truly quote unquote power on testing. And for me, this is, it became just a small portion of what was talked about on the earnings call because there is so much happening.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to believe almost that this is the first FAA conforming eVTOL aircraft that exists on planet Earth. Like, regardless of the label that's on the side, regardless of the manufacturer, this picture right here is the first one that's ever existed. And that's, pretty awesome. And the fact that, of course, it is Joby after all of the hard work, after, 16 plus years, this is Jobin's childhood dream. People started, in Jobin's backyard, sleeping in chicken coops, to now this beautiful aircraft that we get to see here. So, what are your thoughts seeing this? We saw a couple of, kind of things that we maybe hadn't seen or focused on, or how they were going to have the different fairings and whatnot on the vehicle. So curious what your takeaway was on 547 Juliet X-ray, and then we can maybe jump into Reddit and some other more fun topics, I guess.
Yeah, just to mention, there's a question in the YouTube chat, and sometimes that's not coming into us on StreamYard or Riverside, the platform you're using. So I'll just try and bounce back and forth. But I just wanted to flag that there was a question about DBX and do we have any new photos and stuff, and we can just come back to that. But to answer your question, seeing the plane was great, right? I think there was an expectation that Joby had set that there would be Joby pilots, in this plane. They mentioned the power on, and so when that deadline was missed, I think in this industry there's a lot of slippage of timelines, and when I get concerned is when the story changes or the slippage isn't addressed, and you kind of get into a really protracted period of time where you don't have any information. And I know all of the eVTOL OEMs are dealing with this. And from talking to people who are deep into aviation, there has been early counsel that this is par for the course and to expect it and build it in to your plans. Having said that, I know I was very excited about this plane coming out, on the timeline that Joby said. And it was great to see that, before the end of Q1 in 2026, we can see it. Oliver, who does marketing for Joby, complemented this with some additional insights, like the propellers are spinning, so I felt comforted to know that this plane doesn't have any, issues in terms of mechanical problems or design related issues. I think that would be far-fetched, given that they've flown 50,000 miles and have had, multiple planes going through from prototypes all the way up, and that this is the real deal. This is the one that sparked them to go ahead and scale manufacturing. So it was great to see. It'll be great to see it flying. It sounds like that is happening soon, very shortly. You can kind of try and put weeks or days or months to those kinds of statements. I don't know, but it was exciting to see it there for us to see. And I think the next step now is to see it flying, and then start to see like more of these coming down the line. And they alluded to that on the call too, and they've said that previously, right? They've got 5 more in production. And we even got some insights in terms of like, when can we expect those? And I think they said over the coming quarters. So, we could keep going on. We've looked at the hiring pace has been higher than any point than I've seen. When you look at the types of roles that they're hiring, there are a lot of like production, not a ton of design engineers, so it leads to a company that is really truly scaling manufacturing. And we can get into some of the other little insights related to the plane, but that was my overall thought. I was like relieved that they had it. It was, and they even explained some of the reasons why there was a delay. It sounds like designing these planes to have defects for the testing. That's a small little nugget. Maybe we can talk about that too.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think to highlight, we can jump to a comment from somebody. We don't have any set script for how we do this, and the goal is to not for us to preach, but for us to hopefully give perspective and share with those listening. So in terms of just for the question about the DXB vertiport there in Dubai, obviously here's a picture of it from the shareholder letter. And there is a few others that people have uncovered and posted onto X that we've seen, not just of DXB, but also of American University in Dubai, which is going to be the kind of at the base of the Palm Jumeirah complex for Joby as the other vertiport that they'll be operating out of course, the DWC airport, Al Maktoum, where Joby partner JetX is based, and where Joby flew during the Dubai Air Show, will also be a node. There's a lot of private jet travel that interacts with that airport. So obviously you can imagine DWC to Palm Jumeirah is probably going to be a popular route for Joby to start with in the space. But I think what we heard previously from Duncan Walker, who was the head of Skyports, who's obviously the partner with RTA alongside of Joby in building the vertiport, was that the Q1 timeframe was when they plan to be wrapped up with construction. So as we've seen, this isn't even the most recent progress. And we've heard previously from Skyports that they're working 23 hours out of the day, that we still have another month left in the quarter. And with how things have come along in Dubai, it's kind of hard to believe that in December of 2024, I was there and it was just an empty parking lot. To think that here we are only 14 months later, and we have the world's first purpose-built multimodal vertiport nearing completion. So I still feel good about the progress. And as you mentioned, I think it's a core that we can probably not champion loud enough. Is both of us are obviously bullish on Joby and think that the company has done leaps and bounds to get to the accolades that they've achieved thus far and still have. But there is a lot of other entities involved in this, not just from the regulatory side, but also from the political side, from the financial side in terms of the investors, and all sorts of factors that are out of what we've for the most part have tried to focus on with some extent, is in terms of where the engineering seems to be, and what you can look at from flight testing, what we can see from guidance that the companies gave over time and has achieved, whether it's slipped, they've been ahead of it, etc. But I think for the vertiports and everything that's happening in Dubai, extremely excited to see that there's not some massive delta of the time between what they've said and what they're delivering. And in the end, something that I personally, and I know you've been talking about for a while, is, everybody's excited for passengers to be on board these aircraft. I really don't care at the beginning, taking that with a grain of salt, of course, if they're revenue producing or not. The key is going to be safely putting passengers into these aircraft. That doesn't matter to me, even if it slips into the end of 2026 or into 2027, which is totally reasonable and something that could happen based off of again, factors outside of Joby's control. Is that this is going to be a story that exists for the next 50 plus years if they're able to pull off these aircraft, just like when helicopters came out or airplanes before that. And I think some of the expectation and some of the buzz and hype has got people so amped up and the anxiety so high that people are still forgetting that this was once a moonshot, right? This was something that people thought would only just stay as a cartoon and a figment of people's imagination. And now you have, the first TIA conforming aircraft being built. You've got the first purpose-built vertiport here on the screen. This is something that, the timing doesn't need to be exact. Obviously, some people are trying to do that for their own, trades and whatever else. That's not what we focus on. But yeah, that's what I'd like to take away from Dubai, the vertiport, the timing is that, and especially now that people can see this. I mean, I remember once upon a time, someone from the Reddit community that did some really crucial work and bought satellite footage, right, to see when this was just a hole in the ground, and then now to see there's pictures every which way and people are posting about it on Instagram and realtors talking about it for homes and real estate around. So anyway, yeah, I think that's where what my thoughts are on with the DXV vertiport and the progress thus far.
Yeah, I think it's I'm not worried about Dubai personally. It seems like the RTA is super dialed in. If you follow the RTA on X, it's nuts. Like, you'll see people who will post like they're having trouble in traffic, and they'll tweet about it, and within an hour they'll get a response back from the RTA with instructions on what's going on or how to fill out a form to log their process. We saw videos from the RTA talking about their airport modernization, and it was almost like we're ready to share this with the world. And you saw air traffic control towers who have access to high resolution cameras in a digital space. I don't think they're even looking out real windows. It's just a wraparound, digital view of the airport with night vision. So, operators can zoom in and see things and see problems on the tarmac. So the RTA seems super dialed in. We've seen all their publicity around 2026. And I think Skyports has been an excellent partner. And back to partnerships that matter, I think there are a lot of people that are in that vertiport space, and the people, just like there are a lot of people in the eVTOL space, and the ones that are producing, are the ones that are actually on the front line. And I think over time, it's natural to nitpick and not nitpick, but just there'll be a lot of critical thought that is going to pour into Joby now that it's starting to become a real thing. And so, for all the OGs who followed the company from the technical perspective, I think a lot of that is now shifting to questions around the business model. Good questions like, when will the vertiports be up and running? But that's not something I'm worried about in Dubai. I think the construction pace is incredible. And like you said, they have a bunch of other vertiports that are coming up. Some of them require new construction, some of them don't, right? There's some helipads that can be reused that are not going to be very capital intensive. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's, the perspective is important as we look ahead. And yeah, maybe with that, just, in being hopefully beacons of some type of perspective and also visibility for the company, conversations that are had on Reddit and from, longtime retail investors and people who care about the Joby story. They're I think the biggest highlight for the Joby nerds, the biggest highlight for the broader market, and rightfully so, was the announcement of Uber Air powered by Joby. and that, incredible announcement, which is, Uber has been an investor for quite some time, over 100 and whatever it is, $25 million at this point, between a couple different tranches. But the biggest thing for, again, the Joby nerd side of it, and rightful questions, because I think it was something that's been bounced around in Reddit communities and questions for quite some time, was in and around the payload of the S4. And so I think, it's something that I'd like to jump into, because I know you've heard some things. We've probably even maybe differed in our thoughts about it, or where it is over time, and jumping into different perspectives on it. But I'd like to start out with yours, because it is important to hear what everyone else is saying. And I'm curious what your initial takes are on it, and we'll go from there, and hopefully we can get some questions in the chat.
Yeah, just real quickly before there's so much news that you just sort of like jump over things. But on that Uber, I thought it was really important that you had their chief product officer, in that promotional video. It wasn't like you've seen some of these partnership announcements early on, and they're a little light on details, and all of a sudden here's Uber coming out with Uber Air. So the branding is clear. You've got your chief product officer talking about it. So the senior leadership investment in Joby is on display. They had pictures of the Uber taxis, those minivans that are unique, that I haven't seen in the Bay Area. And then they even had like a Uber Dunes integration. I posted on X. There's a picture of an SUV in the desert sand having fun. And so I think from a partner perspective, the Uber announcement was a very mature product offering, vision, and ready to go. So all the way from, booking your Uber to booking your Uber Air through Joby, onto the, have some fun while you're in Dubai and check out the dunes. Just remind me real quickly your question, and I think you're on mute right now. Or no, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. Well, actually, it's just I was going to pull up that video, just to we can jump to the Uber piece and then get back to the payloads. Obviously, hopefully we can get more questions. But as I pulled up X, I'm going to pull this over into the screen to share, so that you can see. This is just posted by the RTA, just a few minutes ago. And this was the director general and chairman of the board of directors at the RTA in Dubai, receiving the executive director of the business division at Uber, and talking about autonomous vehicles. And obviously that's more on the ground level of things, but obviously that is going to apply and directly plug into Joby. And just to highlight the depth of Joby's partnerships, and you start to see where Joby's partners are also partners with each other. And it's this entire ecosystem that's being built around, where Joby isn't the only one doing all the heavy lifting. So yeah, just a cool little timely nugget.
Yep.
The repeat.
I put a link in the studio chat too, that has some of those screenshots from the Uber video. But I'm happy to jump into payload too if you want to pivot now.
Yeah, let me pull up the chat. I'll grab the link there. And hopefully,
yep, can see it. Cool. Yeah, that first picture is the Uber Dunes.
Yes. So yeah, I think we can maybe I'll just
the Uber app.
This video play for a second. It's only 45 seconds, and then we'll kind of close out on this and then get to the payload, just so we're not keeping everybody in suspense on that. We don't want to handle business as such. But so here we go. This is the UAE context given by the chief product officer of Uber with the Uber Air powered by Joby announcement.
App in 5 years is going to be very different. Hi everyone, this is Sachin Kansal, Chief Product Officer at Uber, reporting live from the future of transportation in the UAE. We have autonomous vehicles with our partner WeRide in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, we are announcing all electric air taxis with our partner Joby Aviation to be launched later this year. And for all the adventure seekers in the area, we are also bringing the Uber Dunes experience to Dubai. See, how we build for the future is very high tech, it's very advanced, but most importantly, it is all about the user. The future is here. Join us in the Uber app today. The Uber.
Cool. So hopefully the sound was came through on that. If not, there's the subtitles for everybody watching along. But yeah, I just thought it was important to see that, as we get into the stage of things, Joby can say whatever they want in terms of, guidance and use the exact verbiage and language. But I think it's important to see that even Uber, is also saying later this year. So they have to feel, pretty confident and where things stand. So yeah, anything else you want to highlight on the Uber side?
Just just to reinforce what you said, I don't think Uber does things casually. And they had a senior leader in Dubai. They also talked about an integration story that's far more complex. So that shows some of the years of planning from the early Uber Elevate to the Elevate OS and the Elevate team that Joby acquired, all the way through integration to not just the last mile to get you to your destination, but also to offer you an adventure. So I think there's excitement in the industry. Obviously the Joby partner community is starting to go to market now, and Joby left 2025 with we're ready, and from what we heard in the call, it looks like it's full speed ahead. Now, if we transition to the payload discussion, that bit I had 2 rounds of questions. There was an initial question that Joben answered, and then there was a follow-up that came back, and we learned a little bit more details. I think the summary for me was that they didn't specifically say they're ready to go with 4 people sitting in the plane with a certain maximum weight of 1,000 pounds, which was what they have listed on all of their product information. And it seemed to me that Joben was being coy about how they're going to solve some of the problems that they're having with getting the maximum power out of the batteries or the design, and there was a pathway that was sort of laid out where he talked about an evolution, and then the specifics around whether the battery, the software, or other. And Joben had also said there's other technical things or something to that extent. What was your take on that? Am I summarizing that a little too clumsily?
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those things that until there's an explicit number that's maybe said out loud, even though it's been publicized via some of the materials from Joby, from the estimates that they'll have for payload. But yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I think for me, the biggest thing is, to kind of break apart that conversation. And if there's any other questions that people want to put into the chat, we can hopefully touch on too. But for me, the question to Joben was very direct and very explicit. And whenever Joben has ever answered in any of his interviews, I've said this before, but you can see the wheels turning where he has knowledge about things for his company, the technology that he's working on. Again, this all started with investments from the Defense Innovation Unit from the government. He has to be very explicit. Now, to just say what the payload is, people say, well, why can't you say that? Why not? I think it's also something that, yes, Joby could be working towards getting to a certain weight. They have, for the most part, they have put out numbers for the 1,000-pound payload, which is, of course, including passengers and baggage, which sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. But they've always just said it was a pilot and 4 passengers. That was, the goal for the vehicle. Now, they've also said that it could fly up to 200 miles an hour, and we've seen that. That's not a question mark. We've literally seen that happen on radar multiple times. So they've also talked about the decibels that the aircraft produces, 45 dBA flying overhead, 60 to 65 during takeoff, at some reasonable distance away. And those have also been vetted. So for me, I'm less concerned about this, and actually it kind of makes my gears turn of what would happen if it was actually more than what people expect, or maybe it's neutral or thought of in a different way. As we were talking about offline, we know that Joby several years ago already flew the S4 and the full, the complete electric variant over 150 miles, and that was in up near the Bay Area. And then, so since then, I've tracked that on radar, a couple of years ago, where they were doing multiple flights that were over an hour, and at the average speed that they're flying, 100 plus knots, that would get you to, somewhere between 100, 150 miles of range. Plus, that's still going to be safely done. So there's still reserves on board. That maybe Joby has something up their sleeve where they can actually maybe not increase the payload, but it increases the range. And that's where I kind of kick it to you and see maybe if we can instigate any questions. But
yeah, there was the question about just regarding the payload and how far off are they? Is there an issue with the batteries? Or is it the battery related topic? Is it how big is it a deal to recertify new battery design if it's batteries? Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say for that, I think, what's important is that people look at what's already been put out there. There's a lot of people new to the space, a lot of people who are maybe have been in the space for a while, but there's maybe fatigue of how long this has taken, or et cetera, even though this was always, roughly the time frame outside of, there's been a couple things that are outside of Joby or anybody in the space's control. But go back to the Joby interview with Sandy Monroe, where John Wagner literally handles and explains in detail how the Joby batteries are both built and put together, what they've been developed to. These aren't, novel batteries per se, maybe how they're put into the vehicle, since there is no such thing as an eVTOL, successfully outside of what Joby and some others are trying to do. But these batteries are from the automotive side. So these are not, Joby has tested unique chemistries and things like that they've hinted towards a few times in the past. But what they're using now are, automotive grade batteries that have already been tested. They've been testing these with the FAA for quite some time. In the video, which Sandy Monroe, John Wagner talks about how these are put into laser welded battery modules that then make up the battery packs, and that these are already tested so that thermal runaway could not happen if there was some type of failure, et cetera. So, we can talk about it and give our perspective, but I'm going to leave it to John Wagner, who came up with the Model S battery train for the Tesla and has been working at Joby for quite some time, for the expertise on this. But, I hope that people don't get lost in, maybe some things that people try and instigate on Reddit, or just aren't fully knowledgeable about, and really just listen to the experts at this, because, Joby isn't just a fly-by-night project. This is, serious engineers, world-class tip of the spear that are coming up with these technologies. And sometimes they're not going to be able to tell us everything publicly. That would be very silly of them. As an investor, I would not want them to say, hey, we've got a battery chemistry that's going to actually allow us to fly 200 miles, or maybe something else, right? It could go either way, but that's my 2 cents on, people having questions. These batteries are not, something that's not been certified, or that Joby's trying to do by themselves. There's a lot of background that's happened with this, and they've already talked about in the future, as more powerful battery dense battery options get built for them, or available for them, that they'll be able to swap them in and out, because they use modules into their packs and they do everything in house. So anyway, I will, I'll stop there, and you keep me honest on things.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think a big shout out to the Reddit, retail Joby tracker community for putting this battery topic and weight topic on the agenda. If you followed the story from the early days, there were questions about how's Joby going to do it, what kind of performance are they going to get. And so it was kind of, on one hand, it was nice to see the maturing of the discussion around the company to all of these things, right? And there's a ton of things, like, you know, whether the certification process is moving fast, whether Joby can build the planes, whether anyone can build the planes. And so this is just the next sort of conversation. And I think what I heard from Joe Ben was, we're very pleased with the performance. Now, that came after he said it might take us a bit of time, and I'm just paraphrasing here. This is an investment advice, or don't make any decisions based on what I'm saying here. But it said something effective, it may take us a bit of time to evolve into that. And then later, the specifics were something to the effect of, where was it? In terms of payload of the aircraft, that's something we expect. It may take us a bit of time to evolve into that. We're very pleased with the performance. And then they're both elements that are there, as well as other upgrades we expect to happen over time. And I think the other element, both elements was from a question around, is it a software evolution or a battery evolution? And so Joe Ben acknowledged both of those, plus added other upgrades. So this is a company that has a top level staff of engineering. They've tackled all of the problems that have been ahead of them up until this point. And I think, you know, I'm not an expert on batteries or physics of aerospace flying, but some of the things I wonder whether, you know, you can just trade. So you can trade maybe, you know, initial 100-mile range for, say, 50 miles, which would give you plenty of range for all of the air taxi and all the demonstrations that you're talking about, and just, you know, add more weight and use the power of the battery and trade off range. They mentioned block upgrades or other things that they can do from software. They're not standing still, right? They're going to continue to use this time to refine. And again, we're talking about, they haven't started their FAA flight yet, so there's room to develop. And they have 2,000 people at Joby working on this problem, or these issues, or trading off, you know, performance in different ways. And so I'm confident that they're ready to go. When you look at when you stack up all the partnership announcements, you know, the capital raises and things like that, I think people with more insights into what's happening exactly day to day, you know, seem to be confident to keep going forward. So how it all comes to market, you know, whether the first very official Dubai flight at the end of this year has 2 passengers instead of 4, and doesn't travel 100 miles, you know, per what Joby has guided to, that's fine with me. I mean, I'm looking really long term, like this. The ramp of these planes is going to take time to get to 50, to get to 100. The vertiport development, all of these things are ahead of us. And so it would be naive to think that there still aren't other fit and finish things that need to get done. And to your point, the competitive landscape, you know, I can see why Joby would want to hold some of these cards close to the vest, whether that means they have other things that are coming that'll improve the performance, or just meet the performance expectations that were set. But when I step back, really big picture, you know, the first year, you're not going to need to have a plane that can carry 4 people 100 miles. You're just not. You're not going to have any routes. You're not going to have any missions that are flying at that point. And so, you know, evolving the platform and solving some of these performance challenges, I think I'll be watching carefully. But you know, they seem to still be thinking that they're very happy with the performance, and you know, they're going forward. They're ramping production. I mean, that to me is a huge signal of how confident they are.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, you know, that's a great point to highlight there. Is there won't, you know, as, you know, I think was very clear. And I want to say it was actually the first time that maybe it had been explicitly said like that, where Jobin just straight up said in the prepared remarks that Dubai is going to be the first, you know, air taxi network for them, which I thought was great, because it put that to bed in terms of what the US, and I've been saying that for a long time. I know you have been, you know, championing that as well, but the FAA type certification is going to be, you know, that is the coup de grace, right? That is the big goal for them to hit. But also, if en route to that and in parallel, the UAE regulators there with RTA, GCAA allow them to fly in advance with passengers, and it becomes more about an administrative type of thing than obviously they're not going to let unsafe aircraft go into the airspace. Joby is never going to put their pilots, much or less passengers, or the aircraft itself up into a non-safe manner. So I think as we look to Dubai being that mission set that's going to start out the Joby story from carrying passengers, we're not even going to be at 50-mile trips, right? So to your point, payload is only affected by the flight profile. So if you have to do a whole bunch of vertical flight, you're going to burn up the energy in the batteries versus once you get on the wing. But if you're only having to do a shorter trip, to your point, yeah, you should be able to shift those things. It's just like in a helicopter, based off of weight and balance and other things, you don't put a full amount of fuel into the aircraft. So there's a lot of different things that I think if people really dig in, it's not really as much of a concern. I think more of how Jobin answers. Sometimes people nitpick and don't like that he doesn't always say things directly and explicitly, but
Hey, Travis, we lost your audio. Hey, Travis, I don't know if you can hear us, but we lost your audio. Hey, well, Travis is ramping this back up again. He's had a couple of glitches. I'll just add some thoughts on. Hey, Travis, you back?
eVTOL fan, I don't know what is going on with this. I can't hear you, and I don't think you can hear me either. So
you get to say what you were saying,
try and close out of here and get us back on track.
Yeah.
But in the interim, I'm gonna try and play this video because I think it's showing. So it'll at least give some context for folks while it's playing there in the background.
Of production. It's got some
fan,
around it, but essentially this here is
the
battery module that houses the energy storage. Now, on the plane, there's 28 of these. And we've selected a modular architecture specifically for its safety benefits, as well as manufacturing and maintenance benefits. So 7 of these make a battery pack. And on the plane, we have 4 battery packs. Those are located up in the wing and then in the forward nacelles. So this morning when you saw the plane, you probably saw where those batteries reside.
Well, we didn't see where they would, we weren't told where they resided, okay. But I knew one thing, it wasn't in a cockpit.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So I was pretty happy about I'm a big fan of space claim, smart space claim, and cabins are not the spot that I want to see inverters or battery packs and whatnot. Yep. They should be somewhere else. So I like this idea. This looks a lot like the strategy that BMW initially started out with the i3. The only difference is yours looks like a, I could be wrong, but it looks like a fully machined, maybe not, when I saw the back.
Mostly machined.
So eVTOL fan, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So this portion, I think, is really crucial for people to listen to about structurally what these battery modules are made up of, how they're designed, and how they will ultimately be used within the S4. Remember the battery module that you're looking at right here. There's 7 of these that make up a pack, and there's 4 packs that exist on the S4 aircraft. So I'll play the rest of this, and then we'll get to it.
There's also some sheet metal parts, but it's all titanium. So that's what you won't find in the automotive battery system. And the titanium is there actually surrounding all of the battery cells to make a complete containment for any kind of emergency or failure. So the titanium has really good lightweight strength properties and also very good high temperature properties. So essentially what we proved to the Federal Aviation Administration and indeed ourselves is that we can withstand any kind of battery failure. And so you can imagine all the different failures we list that could occur, either electrical failures or other types. And we have to maintain throughout all of that a safe continued flight and landing. And so that's the contract we sort of sign with the FAA and of course with our customers, that we're going to deliver a safe landing. And we do that through a very extensive series of tests where we test every one of those failures.
Let's just talk about how that works with the open case.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the titanium shell here and why we do that. This is a sample of the shell. And you can feel how lightweight that is.
It's nothing here.
And titanium's incredibly strong and stiff. But what we do is we fully enclose the batteries. And this is missing its closure panel just to show you what it looks like. But as you can imagine, we couldn't get the battery cells in there after we put this together. So what we do is we assemble the entire module and then we build the box around it and do a weld that seals hermetically around the entire module. And so
that's what I was just going to point out. If you look down here, you can see the laser weld going all the way around. And I've talked a lot about laser welding. It's my all-time favorite. A lot of people think that I have like some kind of contract with Trump or something, Trump lasers. But really and truly, the longer you get around manufacturing, the more viable laser welding is, especially when you're looking at something as light as this and something that has to be incredibly strong. There's a lot of power inside these batteries, and you have to contain that if you have an event. And this will do the job because it's titanium, and because really and truly, I can count on that weld all day long.
So here we have the charging handle. So if you look.
All right, so
can you hear me okay?
Hopefully that gives everybody a good context to where things are, just with some of the insights there from Sandy on the battery side of things. But yeah, eVTOL, we can move on from the battery side, but I think it's a really important piece of things. Obviously, payload is almost going to be wholly they're tied to the battery side of things, outside of obviously just the build of the aircraft. But anything else you want to highlight?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? I don't know if you can hear me right now. Travis, there might be a delay. Travis, can you hear me? Yeah, it looks like we're still having some audio problems, so hang in there. I don't know if anyone can hear me, but one of the other sort of battery thoughts in my mind is I'm not as fussed about early performance of the battery, from a hybrid technology standpoint. I think for me, the key things from the eVTOL space was the vertical landing and the quiet nature of the plane. And so if Joby has some hybridization technology that they're working with L3 Harris for the military missions that they're planning, and some of that technology I'm expecting would roll into the S4 down the road for longer range, so I think there's a bunch of different things that they can do, but I'm pretty confident on the battery side and on the production of the plane and the optimization. They're in the early days, and so refining their process or refining their software, the things that Joby mentioned are all in play. And they've got a pretty darn good engineering team that loves solving hard problems. I mean, these are some of the toughest problems. No one else has been able to do it. So I think they've got the right team. Travis, can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know what's going on with my my internet, but
That's okay.
hate to break the pace of things.
Yeah, I just added to what you had said, and I talked a little bit about how I'm not as fussed about the battery for multiple reasons, the hybridization, the turbo gas electric capability that Joby has down the road could come into play on top of refining the system or the battery or some of the other engineering things that JoBen referenced but didn't go into details on. And for me, the beauty of this technology is just the quiet ability to land vertically. So whether you end up augmenting that with a hybrid electric combination, a gas turbine down the road, I think there's just lots of opportunities for Joby to continue to get the performance that they want or expand it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, and at the end of the day, I think it's more what people either want to believe that the aircraft and the team is capable of building, or if they still have questions, which is, obviously right for everyone to have their opinion about it. I would just, also lean back to what Joby's already proven with the S4 aircraft in terms of just the electric version, not even to mention, as you said, the other technologies that they have from hydrogen and the gas turbine. But, a couple of years ago, I believe it was 2021, I'll pull up and post a link, but Joby already flew 150 miles on the all electric variant. And obviously they're going to fly that and land it still with reserves. So that is something that, something people should not overlook and pay attention to, because I think it's a really crucial part of the story, of what Joby's vehicles are capable of, because it's something, at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. When you look at how these things have, been successful, and you can track them on radar and actually, see what's happened outside of all the different footage that Joby's put out. And I think seeing that and knowing how often the aircraft has flown, significant trips, and obviously that was without a pilot on board, but presumably just the pilot on board is certainly not a question or a challenge for the company. So yeah, any what else can we touch on? I think that is important for folks out there.
We didn't really talk about Bonnie Doon. That's probably a sentimental story, but pretty worthwhile when you think about how it was stitched together with the mechanic video that came out before, and seemed par for the course for Joby to put their team ahead of any leadership kind of announcements and things like that. You only saw a photo of JoBen, from the early days, and that could have been a story about JoBen, the founder, and all about JoBen and his vision and his early days at Stanford, and mixed with the Elon Musk video question that he asked in a public forum at Stanford. You know what I mean? You could have, that's the typical play, but true to form, Joby talked about their mechanics and the people who are touching the plane and getting it ready and safe. And so I thought that was pretty cool. And we talked about the partnerships, and I think the other topics were just that they seem very focused on scaling and getting these things out, even as they start to talk a little bit more detail about some of the performance challenges that they're tackling as well.
Yeah, and just for the sake of, I guess, the connection or whatnot, I'll save from sharing the screen, and people can hopefully do their own homework and due diligence, which is important all the time as is. But as you mentioned there, the Bonnie Doon flight was extremely important. I think you actually hit maybe one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Imagine that your childhood dream was starting to come to fruition, and you flew that thing that used to be a dream and was able to, essentially land it on your property. And you didn't hear a peep from Joby outside of celebrating the team and what the broader success of that moment was for them, as you know, Oliver Walker-Jones and some of the mechanics even said as a, you know, a nice homecoming. And for me also, you know, seeing the mechanic side of things, it's something that we haven't really touched on a whole bunch in previous conversations, but I think it is important to understand that, you know, obviously there's the engineers behind building all these different components and everything else, as Joby is a vertically integrated company. We've talked about the leadership, the extensive experience that these leaders have across the, you know, different sectors, whether they're engineers or pilots or both, for almost the entire management team. But then when you think about the mechanics and the MRO, maintenance, repair, overhaul piece of the business, and really the operation, that's what's going to be how these aircraft can scale over time as well, because, you know, any downtime, it won't matter what the payload of an aircraft is if it's not flying, right? It won't matter how many seats are in the aircraft if, you know, the maintenance team isn't able to do, you know, particular work or upgrades or things over time on these aircraft. And so I thought it was really great to see the mechanics and maintenance team speak to, because they in themselves are, you know, engineers and highly skilled workers, but also what came through is that, you know, there was both men, women on the team, and everybody was so fired up, and you could tell that, you know, they don't mind to get their hands dirty. They really, you know, have a tangible and tactical connection with these aircraft. And I think for me, that's also something that's, you know, really important, that it's not just the pilot that's, you know, cares about what's going on in that aircraft, both on the ground and up in the air, but also the team that's taking care of it, maintaining it, also giving the feedback to the engineers to help better design and evolve the aircraft, because obviously they'll have their type certification and the conforming aircraft 547 Juliet X-ray. That design has been baked for quite some time outside of very small you know, modifications. But this team is also developing, you know, other aircraft that have maybe been seen but not officially announced, and also others that we know are cooking behind the scenes. So yeah, that was something that I really took away from, as always, Joby. You know, they have the world-class engineers, but also besides that, these are just people really fired up and passionate about, you know, this crazy moonshot idea that they're actually, you know, on the horizon of bringing to market.
Yeah. You know, there are a bunch of different topics that happen. I know we've spent a lot of time on the battery, but there was an entire story about Joby subsidiaries that if you're sleeping, you wouldn't know that Avionics is partnering with Rapita. Avionics does software certification or aerospace certification. And, you know, H2 Fly talked about being ready with their next generation of technology for hydrogen and having European demonstrations in the next phase of this European program. So there's a lot of irons in the fire that we love to get into, because it talks about future growth potential. And I know we're like really centered now on the plane that was in the conforming plane and what's the range, and we want to have all those answers today. But I really enjoyed the step up in discussion. I think that Avionics Costa Rica operation is a really interesting part of Joby. And if you look to, you know, differentiating across the OEMs, you know, they have an entire, they were smart enough to buy this organization, and then, you know, it's a business, right? So they can use it for themselves, but they can also use it to help other companies certify. And there was a FAA official who does training, I believe, who posted on LinkedIn, and she had a really long piece about the certification process and how it's not, you know, the FAA slowing things down. It's just the nature of the process. And if you didn't do your homework, and it kind of scolded the industry, right? In terms of what do you expect? You need to have your paperwork ready, because that's where the delays start, and the delays compound, according to her piece, if you don't have your ducks in a row. So if you have a great plane, but you haven't, you know, sort of had this entire documented system, you're going to suffer. You're going to naturally have things as you go back and forth, and then add to that vertical integration. If you have to go back and talk to a supplier, I think Joby's advantage is, you know, everyone's in house. If you watch the Bonnie Doon video, they talked about the early days, how they're all in the same place, and they would just like finish making a part and then walk over and add it to the plane. So I think that's the origin of Joby. And then they had the foresight to, make some really smart strategic acquisitions, hydrogen being the longest play, but some of the nerdy paperwork and software certification and things like that, they're actually turning into a business and partnering now with another company. So pretty exciting, if you look at it from that lens. We could talk about EIPP. There was a lot of news on that front as well. And then, the vertiports as well, we touched on, but, Joby's doing some interesting things there. If you look at their hiring, they have an architect, open position for an architect to help design, vertiports. And we know Joby's got a multifaceted vertiport strategy with partners from Metropolis. They've got vertiports. Some of the vertiports are being built by local municipalities. Some of them will probably be Joby designed. That question also came up on the earnings call about like, what do they see? Are they going to own? They definitely suggested they're going to partner, but what that partnership looks like, and does Joby own a couple and then or partner with other people to build them? So I know I said a lot there, but we have so many different things we could talk about if we want to keep going.
Yeah, no, I think, I always appreciate your perspective of things, and it is important because this is such a long tail story of things that are going to be developing over time. But I think one that we can shift gears into, it's the other, hot topic in the industry, and something I think that's more positive and we can really drive home in terms of here stateside, and, some good news that's happening outside of, quote unquote FA delays or whatever adjective to be used with them, but that is the EIPP program. And so to kind of bridge into that, I will, shout out to Rodrigo on the call, who I think gave some really enlightening things that we hadn't heard explicitly yet. I know Joby Investor Watch on X had reposted it in particular, but it was talking about the simulators and speaking to, as you said, some of these maybe behind the scenes or quiet partnerships or acquisitions or things that Joby has made. Joby made a partnership with CAE several years ago. That was in 2022. And from there, the simulator program for Joby has started. And so from that side of things, I thought it was really interesting. We heard that there was $3 million that had been allocated explicitly to the simulator. Now, we don't know if that, it sounded like that was just for the simulator that had been delivered, but we'll see about, in terms of for the full dimension simulator that is going to be installed there for the Joby team. But what I thought was another key piece, and Rodrigo, drove it home, and, it was great to see on the call where the executives do, if you listen hard enough, there's an emphatic message that they're trying to, send to you between the lines. And Rodrigo drove home something that Bonnie Simi had once highlighted, and that is that you cannot sell an aircraft. You cannot operate an aircraft that does not have the simulator program and simulators themselves ready for pilots. And I think, in this space, there's a lot of conversation about planes having this designation, whether it's certification or airworthiness or, anything under the sun. But I thought it was really important to hear Rodrigo talking about both from the financial side, the investment of what it actually costs, but that also, this is something that you need all sorts of data and able to build out what the simulator, is actually the purpose of it. And the only, from the eVTOL perspective, the only way Joby would be able to do that was themselves, because they're the only ones who have flown, as you earlier alluded to, 50,000 plus miles for the S4 platform. And again, just for context, I always, it's just something more tangible to people because it's so out there, but 50,000 miles is the equivalent to flying around the Earth more than 2 times. And, you can take that with a grain of salt. It's kind of anecdotal, but that is a lot of miles to have put on the program, a lot of data to be fed into the simulator program. Eric Allison has talked about how they're at the point with testing in the S4 that they have to actually decide what data they want to keep. And so that just tells you, the level of robustness that Joby has built into these simulators. And once the simulators come online, that's when the pilots come online. Joby obviously has a few that have already make up the flight test team, but we're going to need a lot more pilots if we're going to have a lot more aircraft. And so, with that, I think the most bullish thing out of EIPP, and you had posted about it, and people should definitely check out your post, was talking about North Carolina in particular, their proposal around EIPP, and they gave pretty detailed little schematic and a really great overview and snapshot, I think. So I know you've been doing a lot of digging on that. Did you want to kind of touch on some of the highlights?
Yeah, I think that was the one where you got some really interesting specifics about planes, and they listed the Joby S4 specifically, as well as a Caravan. And we know Joby's been doing a lot of autonomous work with their X-Wings technology. I think a lot of people were focused on that with the defense applications, which we heard that there would be 2 demonstrations, one on site at Joby, and then a second one that would be on site at a customer. So that to me was an interesting nugget to see it emerge in the EIPP paperwork. So another great opportunity for Joby to basically do some R&D and do a showcase and start to help the entire industry move toward using these eVTOLs, whether it's autonomously or through other aircraft. And Beta is also in that space as well with their cargo focus right now. So it looked like a very thoughtful layout of a case for inclusion in the EIPP program. We don't know what states are going to get in yet. There was talk of at least 5, so it could be more. And then the mix of how all of the OEMs participate is unknown, but it seems like Joby is planning on it being involved in as many of them as get approved, because it has a plane that can fly. You saw Buddy, their lead test pilot, who's stepping in to a role of being the lead demonstration test pilot, and Zach moving up. If you remember, Zach was the person who talked to everyone through the failure mode video, where Joby turned off batteries, turned off propellers, and the plane flew perfectly as expected. So I think we're all waiting for these next few weeks. Maybe the next time we do this, we'll have more of a real sense of the landscape and which states or cities or municipalities and who's involved. But it sounds like from Joby's perspective, they expect to be involved in almost all of them or many of them. And, that is part of their ramp. They specifically said that they're ramping based on the demand for EIPP and Dubai. And that seems like the right place to be. They seem to be able to have these other 5 planes coming off the line for testing, and then they'll have plenty of units that they can use, like they've shown, where they can operate on multiple continents at the same time. There was one more too that we got some details on, and we still haven't really gotten any big details from New York or LA. Florida has also started to do a lot of work with their regulatory process. There's a lot of activity. You can follow it in terms of what's happening in the Senate and things like that. But I think there was one more where we, in these last few weeks, that came out and actually listed some of their work, and that was in Ohio.
Yeah, no, I think, we could touch on Ohio, because I think there's a great bridge there. Is that specific, and we posted in the chat here, was about the medical use case. But I think what a key portion of things that you highlighted here, and that we've spoken about in some of the previous conversations, is in and around EIPP. And that's when you talk about, the different proposals, these different cities, different localities that have been involved with the EIPP process, that at the end of the day, and as you mentioned, 5 seems to be the initial number that's going to happen. And between both Jobin and Paul, they both gave references to, in the, kind of sounded like the immediate coming weeks, that we would hear what those proposals, the ones that had been selected, were going to be. But in particular, let's say that even if they, I believe also that it'll be, probably all 5, as that's what the hints seem to be at. But also, the only way that you could participate in even one would be if you had an aircraft that flew. And I think that's something that is also, really crucial for Joby, is that Joby does already have multiple tails that have flown, at this point, hundreds of thousands of miles, depending on the specific tails, some of which have been, in the States, some have been in Dubai, some have been in Japan. But when you think about that, Joby has those vehicles ready to fly right now. They have the pilots ready to fly them right now. That's something for EIPP that, is pretty unique to Joby as you look around the landscape, outside of, some other use cases that, medical would probably touch on initially, which is going to utilize, for the most part, I think, the CTOL kind of configuration of AAM. But I think for me, hearing Joby in particular, when they mentioned the new conforming aircraft, that the other aircraft, they still, mentioned that they're coming off the line. But we know that Joby has already been able to produce at least 4 in a year. And that was, a couple of years ago. But obviously things have begun to heat up. And as Rodrigo, again, a shout out to him, talked about what their cash burn expectation was going to look like, since they're going to be doing first part of the year and second part of the year now versus the full period of the year. Things have really shifted as he started to talk about the S curve, and that was pretty exciting. So EIPP, that'll use the current fleet. That's great to know, but also that the conforming aircraft are going to start to not just come off of the line, but start to actually ramp up from a manufacturing perspective. And so with that, maybe we can touch back onto Ohio and the EIPP medical use case, maybe what we think the Super Pilot and the 208B Grand Caravan from the X-Wing portion of Joby's portfolio will be doing. And of course, would be remiss not to highlight that when the Blade acquisition happened for Joby, what used to also be included within the Blade umbrella was Strata Critical Medical. And that is its own company now that's traded SRTA. And of course, people, can look up about that company as well. A lot of incredible work that they're doing. And they, even made an acquisition themselves recently of a company that's has some new technology in the space. But I think medical is going to be really exciting for, both Joby and the S4 eVTOL platform, but also maybe some of these other vehicles that they've talked about, and maybe some that they haven't. So curious where your mind goes when you saw this about the medical side of things and the Ohio EIPP proposal.
Sure. There's an article that goes into more detail. I think you highlighted all the right things. So the primary use case would be organ transport. Joby acquired Blade. Blade was a passenger service delivery and medical delivery company, and they spun off Strata with the understanding that over time they're going to bring in the S4 as the platform to deliver and fulfill those medical missions. So the Ohio piece talked a little bit about how that's like another angle for Joby, and then it perfectly fits into the Strata acquisition strategy. So that seems perfect fit. You're not putting in people into the S4, opening doors and kind of reconfiguring. You're bringing precious cargo, organs. And so to me, it was great to see, like, the EIPP is a public show. There'll be demonstration flights, but it's also a practical demonstration as well. And so just like the Joby used the AFWorks process to do R&D and to develop their platform, their technology, to some extent their business, I think the EIPP now is starting to be a little more meaty for me as you start to think about different product lines or service delivery lines for Joby in the future, where we at some point in the future they're plugged into the Strata business, and you see the S4 doing these like really important missions that I think help with public acceptance as well. And so the article kind of talks about that as a competitive advantage for Joby. So it's great to see it. You kind of, as a business, you go where your customers are, right? And so you have a plan, and the passenger use case is clearly front and center from all of Joby's marketing materials, what we've seen in Dubai. But it's great to see that there's a stronger base of opportunity for Joby to take advantage of, and to do it while you're also building public perception that these planes are safe, they're going to be great, they're going to be quiet, and they can do missions and more missions now in the air than what people thought was possible. Is fantastic to see.
Yeah, as you're saying that, my mind is going, back to, as I think about when I was at Blade and, had an opportunity to both, touch heavily into the passenger side of the business, but also at the time before, it became Strata Critical Medical, and it was what the Blade MetaMobility program started as. And, that wasn't just using helicopters. Actually, for the most part, helicopters were the bridge for the last mile. And, you're using fixed wing aircraft to do a lot of that heavy lifting, just obviously because time is of the essence. And you're usually, for better, for worse, when organs become viable to be used in transplant, isn't always in the most, easiest place to get to, or, is kind of random when it pops up, and you have to be very flexible. And so that's something that, obviously at this point in time, fixed wing aircraft that, are not, purely electric are serving. But where my mind goes with, from the EIPP side of things, as it is really more of the demonstration, is, when we saw in North Carolina that they actually published, now again, just because it's in their proposal doesn't mean it's what, gets accepted in the end EIPP acceptance. But when you see the 208B used there, we already know that Joby, using the Super Pilot technology, has both flown the Grand Caravans, in Hawaii, and that was extensively covered there in the Reforpack exercises with the military. But also they've done some flying in between airports, and this was, wasn't widely reported, but you can go and find out that when they did some of the initial testing and they were flying the aircraft between airports here inside, I believe it was in Northern California, that they were already flying these aircraft between airports where they were just monitoring it from kind of the command center, and the aircraft would take off on its own, land, and then, return home. And so for EIPP, you could demonstrate by saying having cargo that isn't actually human organs in it at the time, just as the demonstration side, these autonomous flights to happen. And I think based off of the fact that the EIPP program, I think it's such a key piece of it that it isn't just the manufacturers, it's also, these localities and cities getting involved with it, that if they're okay and it's more rural area, or they, just feel confident with where the technology is as is, that they're going to fly a Super Pilot aircraft demonstrating cargo capabilities, medical or otherwise, in a city, in and around the United States this year. And when you think about that, man, that's really exciting. And when you think about that, that doesn't require new aircraft to be built per se, right? The Cessna doesn't make enough of the Grand Caravans. If you look up the production, it's actually quite low. But there's a lot of those aircraft out there. Joby already, has a fleet that includes a couple of them that are equipped with the Super Pilot technology. But to me, when I think about, that's a use case where people aren't really, I think, planning on Joby being a cargo carrier. I think if anything in the space, beta has kind of been the default and go-to that people have talked about for that side of the business. But I think when you think about the Super Pilot technology that Joby has with the Grand Caravans, Joby, when they acquired Blade passenger business, and that we found out, that they're already making revenue off of, that revenue isn't all from helicopters. Most people probably don't realize that a lot of that comes from seaplanes and also fixed wing aircraft. And so the seaplanes are using, for the most part, everything that Blade is using, is Grand Caravan as is. And so Joby's already using those aircraft to make revenue via the Blade team and Blade platform. So just imagine them turning that into a cargo business that, maybe it isn't medical organs to start with, or even blood samples or other things like that, but maybe it's just small rural areas that need, point-to-point logistics that they can't really get at this point in time, or they can't get every single day. I think that's something that is hopefully we hear a little bit more out of from the EIPP process. And I feel like it's a pretty promising route for the company without having to kind of grasp at straws or rely on some of the more sticky and difficult parts of bringing the eVTOL air taxi business to fruition.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is just if we step back from EIPP, you know, that's an FAA run program through the White House. And two other signals that I picked up on were just related to that leadership. So from Secretary Duffy to Richelieu, who I think is the deputy director, or I think I've got his title wrong, but Duffy had a speech and he talked about how innovative and cool and life-changing, of all the places you could work, would be at the FAA. And he highlighted the eVTOLs that are coming and changing the way people move. He talked about how they would be more cost-effective and way quieter. And then he also touched on the sort of the innovator's dilemma, and how you have all these innovators, and the job of the FAA is to get the regulations right. So to create this technology in the US, it seems like it's clear. Later, you had Richelieu. He was talking to students at I think it's a fraternity for aviation aspirants, and he was highlighting how the three things that he talked about was the ATC and the modernization, which has benefits to Joby, which they talked about downstream when you have more planes and an ATC that can handle digitally, et cetera. He also talked about developments in AAM, so that was a highlight, and then how to start a career in aviation. And so I think from the top down, the FAA, it's a new FAA, and they're very much focused on the long-term play here, the career for people to stay focused in aviation, and the excitement that there is now around. And there are people excited about SpaceX, and there hasn't been that same energy around, like, I want to go work for Boeing or Textron or any of the other, Archer or Beta, et cetera. And so it's interesting to see the FAA kind of connecting the dots between the EIPP and then also, sort of challenging the industry and the country, and young students to join into this important space that the US wants to lead.
Yeah, I think, to close up, shop on this call or this live stream to talk about, the earnings call and all the spin outs from it. And, you bring up a great point with, at the end of the day, Joby could have the aircraft buttoned up. It could be squared away. They could have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles of testing on it, but it will in the end come down to the airspace and the FAA for type certification, right? Dubai, we're both bullish on it. It's going to be, seems like all signs are pointing to that coming to fruition, here very soon. But the FAA type certification, that is the holy grail. And that is what, all of this is built upon, because with that, essentially becomes reciprocity across almost every regulatory body across the planet. And so, hearing that Duffy, Rocheleau, everybody on board, is still on board. It wasn't just, a pop with the American Drone Dominance executive order from the president, that has continued. And if anything has, continued to ramp up over time in terms of the support and the moving pieces. I think it just kind of shows that, where we are in space and time is maybe some of these delays in the end are actually probably a blessing, because Joby has been able to have a little bit more time to really build out even further parts of their business, infrastructure, partnerships, and also time to, get some more visibility. I mean, from this Uber partnership, I don't know if it's just my X algorithm or what, but even things that were totally unrelated to, the eVTOL space or people that we follow in the eVTOL space were talking about this and we're posting about it. And I even saw some really big names in the Tesla space weren't even really familiar with this and said, wow, do I need to go to Dubai right now to try this? And so I think that type of buzz, is really good to see. And all of that, it will in the end. And even with Dubai, all the progress there with the regulators is built off of, the FAA. And they've been an incredible partner for Joby in the whole industry for quite some time. And Hopefully that only continues as type certification happens. But with the first conforming aircraft already spinning its blades over at the Marina facility, I think we are on the cusp of things, and really excited to see what FAA, EIPP, and everything else that's bound to happen here in the near future with eVTOL unfolds as. So I'll give you the floor to close it out.
Well, so I was thinking about what you're saying, and I kind of want to connect a thought to vertiports. So I think in this space we've always focused on Joby and all the other OEMs, and there was this race, and then it seemed like Joby pulled away from the pack in terms of having planes being farther along in certification, and it went from it could feel a little bit like you're going from you win the race to what exactly is that early mover advantage, and so naturally there's also early mover scrutiny, and that's what we're seeing now. I think all of us who follow this space are like parsing every single word from the earnings call that is being delivered in a very careful sort of legalese way to maintain all the options that Joby has, and so there may be a sense of the battery stuff wasn't a great answer. But I just want to throw one thought out, and this came from the Skyport CEO, and this ties to vertiports. And on LinkedIn, he put a post and he connected to an article, and I shared it in X. And the article was talking about Australia and how in 2019 they were early with Uber Elevate, and they had meetings, and they were listed as one of the 3 early launch places for that project. And the CEO of Skyports was lamenting the Australian authorities for moving too slowly and missing out, and now being sort of more in the back of the line. Eric Allison was quoted in the article saying that it would be a great market and there's a lot of partnership and blah, blah, blah. But, down the road was where it was placed. And so here you have, the vertiports with a Z, not vertiports with an S, CEO talking about how that was a missed opportunity. So I think we're kind of going to be fluctuating between this perspective of Joby's out front, there is going to be more scrutiny. But at the end of the day, if you look at the long arc of this transformation, people are starting to wonder whether they're late to the game. And, that was on display in terms of Australia. Very public CEO of an Australian-based vertiport company talking about that as a missed opportunity. So I'm kind of weighing the two. There's going to be more scrutiny. There's going to be more of all right, Joby's at the front, and there'll be people trailing behind the progress that Joby makes with the FAA. There'll be things that Joby has to do that might go beyond, above and beyond, in order to help the industry mature and have the regulatory process all squared away. And it'll be fun to watch this, but it'll continue to be up and down. And I think you've referenced to at different points, like Tesla went through the same process, where as an early mover in the electrification of cars, there was a lot of joy and there was sorrow. And so that's what makes this so interesting. Nothing's easy. This is something that, aviation hasn't really evolved for most watchers, in the last 70 years since the introduction of the helicopter. Now we have the EIPP program, where you're going to see Joby S4s, flying around more. And there'll be much more stuff to cover as they tackle some of these last few issues as they go to market.
Yeah, no, it's a great perspective, and I think for both of us, the important message, if any perspective to share, is just pressure is a privilege, and Joby is at the forefront, and maybe more people are paying attention now, and but whether it's the next quarter or the quarter after that, we are at the portion of the marathon where you're almost in kind of disbelief that you already ran all this time, but that you still have a little bit left to go. And so that's why I think it is great perspective, as you said, of people are getting to a point where maybe there's some fatigue or uncertainty of when the quote unquote finish line, even though this isn't a race. I like to think it's more of just the prelude to the long story that the Joby team has. So with that, I really, as always, appreciate anybody who stuck around to listen to this, also through all the technical difficulties. Thank you, eVTOL fan, for holding down the fort. Hopefully we can continue to tighten up, being able to share some of the things that we'd like to talk about here. But otherwise, thank you again for the perspective, keeping, lots of the information that maybe isn't so popular or out front. You're always digging, you're always sending, articles. So I really appreciate you carrying the torch on those things. So again, I know we diverted to vertiports, but I'll leave the last words to you, and you can close us out. I'll end it when you're done.
Yeah, I think it was, we got more information, and some of that information may be, to be determined, but there was a ton of progress over the last quarter. And I think the volume of content that's coming from Joby, the partner community speaking up in support, or, in that example, starting to be a little more critical of the wider industry or the regulatory process, whether it was, some of the FAA people posting about the documentation process and needing to have that in place. There's so many little details that stack up that allow this to happen. And one thing I've, started to really appreciate is, how many different things you have to have in order. You have to have the planes, you have to have the manufacturing process. We didn't even get into the defect process. Like I learned a little bit more about that, and how basically Joby's building these planes with known defects in, and then they test them. And so we're still in the early days. There are still a lot of lessons to be learned. I'm confident in the team because I follow the leadership, I follow the hiring process, and you can see the quality of candidates. So yeah, I'm just as excited as I was before, and I'm really thrilled that the plane, the conforming plane, it apparently has propeller spinning and is out on the tarmac. So maybe the next time we talk, or in the future talks, we'll actually get to talk about it flying as well, and I'm looking forward to that.
You're the man. All right. With that, we'll close it out. Thanks, eVTOL fan. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.